para maingatan ang pamilya ko.
Ito ang ambag ko.
Ako.
Ikaw.
Lahat tayo.
Sama-sama nating
Maiaangat ang bayan.
Basta't sama-sama tayo.
Sa pag-ingat buhay.
Para sa ating hanap buhay.
Mask, hugas, iwas.
First, may sense of relief. It's one step into our country stopping the COVID infection. It's better to be protected than not to be protected at all. So, if you have any fears to vaccinate, it's okay to ask, it's okay to read. Maraming mga educational materials available. But ang pinaka-importante is you have yourself vaccinated to protect yourself, to protect your family, and to protect your community.
Magandang tanghali Pilipinas. Gaya ng nauna kong sinabi, si Presidente Duterte ang pangunahing arkitekto ng ating pulisyang panlabas. Careful, calculated at calibrated ang foreign policy ng ating Pangulo pagdating sa West Philippine Sea. Totoo ng Pilipinas ay may territorial at maritime claims at entitlement sa West Philippine Sea, kasama na po ang mga isla na ating inaangkin. Ngunit totoo rin na ang ating claims at entitlement ay pinagtatalunan or disputed ng ibang mga bansa. Dahil dito, ayon sa international law, we have to promote our claims and entitlements and we manage and resolve our disputes through peaceful and legal means. Kasama na po dyan yung paghahain ng mga diplomatic protests. Lahat ng mga ito ay nagsisimula at nagtatapos sa negosasyon. Kaugnay nito, hindi tinatalikuran ni Presidente ang ating claims at entitlements. Ang totoo, ang Pangulo at ang kanyang administrasyon ay paulit-ulit na sinasabi ito sa bilateral talks kasama ang China at sa multilateral fora katulad po ng UN General Assembly. Hindi nakakatulong ang mga outbursts po ng dating Supreme Court Justice Carpio at dating DFA Secretary Del Rosario. Maging ang kanilang demand na hardline all-or-nothing policies na ang resulta gaya ng turo ng kasaysayan ay walang mararating o hindi kaya o kung kaya ay mag-udyok ng giyera. Ito mismo ang iniiwasan po ng ating Pangulo. Dapat alam ito ng dalawang opisyal, lalo na ni dating Supreme Court Justice Carpio na isang abogado at si dating DFA Secretary na naging top diplomat natin. Itigil na nila ang kanilang panlilinlang sa taong bayan sa kanilang mga illegal, impractical at irresponsabling pananalita. Hindi sila nakakatulong. Hayaan na nila si Presidente na may foresight, information at mandato ayon sa ating saligang batas na gumawa ng sound foreign policy decisions. Sa usaping bakuna naman po tayo. Dumating nung Sabado, 1 ng Mayo, ang 15,000 doses ng Sputnik V sa Pilipinas. Ang Gamaleya or Sputnik V, ang pangalawang government-procured vaccine na dumating sa bansa. Ang ibig sabihin nito ay mayroon na tayong 3 brands sa ating vaccine supply inventory. Magiging pilot run itong unang batch ng 15,000 doses para sa paghahanda natin sa pagdating ng 485,000 doses ngayong buwan ng Mayo. Kailangan natin ito para ma-assess ang logistics capability natin, lalo na highly sensitive vaccine ng Sputnik 5 na kinakailangang ma-store sa negative 18 degrees. Mamaya ay makakasama po natin si Dr. Nina Gloriani, DOST Vaccine Expert Panel Head para sa iba pang mga detalye. COVID-19 updates naman po tayo. Nasa 8,346 na po ang mga bagong kaso ng COVID-19 sa bansa ayon sa DOH May 2 Case Bulletin. Patuloy ang pagtaas ng mga gumagaling. Nasa 966,080 na po ang bilang na nakarecover, samantalang nasa 17,431 ang biniwian ng buhay. Nananatiling mababa po ang ating case fatality rate na nasa 1.65%. Ang world average po ay 2.1%. Patuloy ang pagbaba ng aktibong kaso ng coronavirus base sa datos ng DOH ng COVID cases sa buong bansa. Ito ay kukumparahin ang mga bagong kaso noong April 25, May 1, kumpara noong April 18 to 24. So tignan po natin ito, no? Kung titignan nyo po, talaga naman pong ang average numbers noong April 18 to 24 ay 9,068.42 at ngayon po ang average cases ay 8,205.7. Usapin naman po, unahin natin po ang NCR. sapat na baho o kulang na baho ang ating mga kama sa ating mga hospital. Unahin po natin ang NCR. Ang ICU beds po natin ay 70% utilized. Ang isolation beds natin ay 50% utilized lamang. Ang ating ward beds ay 62% utilized. Ang ventilators na utilized ay 54% lamang. Sa buong Pilipinas, 64% po ang ICU beds na utilized. Ang isolation beds ay 45% utilized. Ang ating ward beds ay 51% utilized. Ang ating ventilators ay 43% utilized. Sa iba pang mga bagay, ngayong araw at 3 ng Mayo, ating ginugunita ang World Press Freedom Day. Sabi ng Pangulo, ang selebrasyon ngayong taon, and I quote, affirms the Philippines' commitment to protect press freedom as a public good and as an indispensable requirement of a vibrant democracy. Samantala, mariing kinukundina ng Pangulo ang pagpatay kay Mr. Mariano Antonio Cui III, Consultant for Hospital Operations ng Negros Oriental at dating Chief of Staff ni Congressman Jules Ledesma. Inatasan ni Presidente ang NBI na imbestigahan ang pagpatay na ito at parusahan ng may sala at mabigyan ng katarungan ang pamilya ng biktima. Nakikiramay po ang Presidente sa pamilya at sa mga taga-Negros dahil alam po namin na mahal po itong si Mr. Cui sa buong probinsya ng Negros. Dito po nagtatapos ang ating presentasyon. Makakasama natin ngayon po ang ating Philippine Ambassador to India, Ramon Bagatsing, ating Treatment Czar, Yusek Lipodo Vega, at Dr. Nina Gloriani, DOST Vaccine Expert Panel Head. Unahin ko na po si Ambassador Bagatsing. Ambassador, good morning to you in India, if it's morning in India. Pero tatlo po ang aking katanungan. Unang-una po, inaasahan po ng taong bayan ang 40 million na Novavax. Dahil po sa mga pangyayari sa India, dapat bang asahan pa ang 40 million po na Novavax? O ito buhoy apektado doon sa deklarasyon ng mga opisyales sa India na nagbabawal panandalian ng export ng mga bakuna? Pangalawa po, kailan po tingin ninyo magkakaroon ng repatriation dito sa Pilipinas ng mga Pilipino dahil yung travel ban po natin ay sakop po mga Pilipino. Kinakailangan po magkaroon ng ugnayan sa panig ng IATF at ng embahada kung magkakaroon po ng repatriation flight. At pangatlo, marami pong nagtatanong, paano ba ho tayo pwedeng tumulong sa India? Dahil ang nangyari naman sa India pwedeng mangyari kahit kaninong bansa. The floor is yours, Ambassador Ramon Dondon Bagatsing.
Gandang tanghali sa inyo dyan, Secretary Roque at sa ating mga kababayan. Salamat sa pagkakataon na ito na ibinigay mo sa akin para magpaliwanag ng ilang mga bagay na iyong natukoy. Unang-una tungkol sa vaccines po, under negotiations, dalawang vaccine po ang pinag-usapan dito. Ang una yung Covaxin na nagkaroon na ng EUA from the FDA and hopefully matapos na yung ibang mga regulatory requirements. No? We hope that these requirements can be expedited by the regulatory authorities there in the Philippines so that it can be brought there. So 8 million po yung Covaxin. And once all the approvals are in place, they can send it there within 1 month. Yung 30 million ng Novavax, this is a tie-up with Serum Institute of India, which is the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world, and Novavax, which is an American company. Ang brand name ng vaccine na yan ay Covax. Secretary Galvez was here last month, and he was able to successfully negotiate a supply agreement between the government of the Philippines and Serum Institute. This is 30 million, and the scheduled delivery there is the 3rd or 4th quarter of this year. Now, you mentioned about ban on exports of vaccines. No? The Indian government has not announced any ban on the export of vaccines. But we still have to get approval from them in order for us to send it to the Philippines. So, upon discussions with these importers, basta maliwanag ang approvals dyan sa bansa natin, they can bring it there at the soonest possible time. At sana makatulong naman yan. Yung Covaxin po is a tripartite agreement. In other words, some LGUs ordered, some corporations ordered to go negosyo, and the third party would be the supplier. So once that is settled, it will be there. The 30 million of Covax is between the government and Serum Institute. So it's up to our government to determine how this will be distributed. Now, we are aware that there are 3 phases of distribution, no? Essential services, and secondly, yung mga age group, and thirdly, yung mga bata. The same experience is being done here in India. So hindi po naman sila nagkukulang. The vaccination drive is ongoing, and now they are into phase 3, yung mga 18 years old pataas. On the repatriation, we are very much aware of the difficulties, no? Logistically difficult for us to send our kababayans home because of the travel ban, not only in our country, but in other countries as well. So even without us issuing a travel ban, there is a de facto travel ban, because if you take a commercial flight, the areas that the countries that you will have to transit do not allow Indian passengers. So de facto, we cannot send them home. So we will wait for clearances, and hopefully once these clearances are secured, and the ban is lifted in these countries and in our country, we can send some of our kababayans here. At hindi pa naman ganun karami, no? I mean, if we compare to what happened to Italy, excuse me, Italy and the Middle East last year, hundreds yan. Dito, hindi pa abot ng 100. My count right now is about 50 only. But each number counts, you know, each person counts. If they want to go home, we will do everything to do so, and we have the assurance of Secretary Roque at the appropriate time that we can send our kababayans home. And then thirdly, how can the Philippines help? I think President Duterte has already sent a letter of solidarity and support to the Prime Minister here. Other countries, there are at least 40 countries that have donated oxygen equipment and other ventilators and other medical equipment to India. Pinakamalakas siguro pwedeng ibigay natin sa kanila ay ang ating dasal, ang ating pakikiisa, ang ating solidarity at pakikipagkapwa, no? Service to humanity. That's the best I think that we could do under the circumstances right now, because and the whole world is aware also that we have our challenges back in Manila. Maganda yung report na ginawa ninyo insofar as hospital beds are concerned, because right here it's extremely difficult to get hospital beds, and extremely difficult to get the oxygen needed by the patients. No? So we are fortunate in that sense that we have not, and I hope we will never reach that saturation point where we will not have all the healthcare services required of our kababayans who get stricken with COVID. Because right now here you have 19.5 million Indians who are affected, 215,000 deaths. But on the other side of the coin, you have 155 million Indians that have been vaccinated. So I hope I have answered those 3 points that you have raised, Secretary Roque.
Maraming salamat, Ambassador. So ulitin ko lang po, wala kayong impormasyon na maantala yung pagdating sa Pilipinas sa 3rd and 4th quarter ng mga bakuna na manggagaling sa India.
As far as the Indian side is concerned, Covaxin, Bharat Biotech, they have given a firm commitment that once all the papers are expedited on the Philippine end, then they can deliver that 8 million. Ang Serum Institute naman, September pa ang kanilang planned rollout, so last part of the 3rd quarter and the 4th quarter. So again, yung mga regulatory requirements coming from the US, WHO, etc., once that is secured, wala naman issue. And I don't think that the Indian government will give us a hard time getting authority or approval for the export to the Philippines.
Maraming salamat, Ambassador Bagat Singh. Kasama po natin ang ating treatment czar, Yusek Lipodo Vega. Sir, nakita po natin sa datos na 70% pa rin ang ating ICU beds. Pero napansin ko po dito na sa ICU beds, ang nakasulat pa rin ay 700,000 total beds pa lamang tayo. 700 pala, sorry po. 700 total beds pa lang, no? Pero kinakailangan po siguro i-update natin to para bumaba yung percentage utilization, dahil ang alam ko po, yung 179 na kinumit ng private at public hospitals as a result of the PhilHealth payment at saka yung 120 na additional ICU beds na naging operational only last April 23 sa Tala po, no? So hindi pa kasama sa 700 na ginagamit natin as basis for the computation for 70% utilized. At kapag naisama po yan, bababa talaga yung ating utilization pati na ICU beds, and looking at our utilization of isolation beds, ward beds, and ventilators, mukhang we are approaching the moderate, no? Moderate pa lang dahil 60% po ang moderate, no? So magkano na ba ho talaga, ilan na ba ho talaga yung ating ICU beds ngayon? Dahil ang nakasulat po sa datos ng DOH hanggang ngayon is 700 total beds lang po. The floor is yours, Yusek Vega. Nakamute, Yusek Vega, nakamute.
Good afternoon, Spock Harry, and most especially to Ambassador Bhagat Singh in India right now, and to all the listeners and viewers. First, allow me to mention that for the last 2 months, talagang hinahabol natin ang bed allocation for the COVID patients that we have here in NCR, Region 3 and Region 4A. And so far, our strategy really was to open up the field modular hospitals na ginawa ho natin last November, and make sure also, the second is make sure that the hospitals will have to increase their allocation of beds, lalong-lalo na sa intensive care units, because this will directly impact with our case fatality rates. So for the last 2 months, we've been meeting with the different chief of hospitals, and I'm pleased to report, although this has to be encoded in the data tracker that we already have encoded, we have already added 1,148 a total. Before sa March, we only had 781 na ICU beds. Now we have a total of 1,148, or a difference of 367. So malaking luwang po to. And that's the reason why bumaba na rin ng konti ang ating intensive care units compared with last month, na umaabot talaga sa high-risk category. Ito yung mga naabot between 78 and 80%. Now, it's hovering between 70-71%, kasi din, ang alam naman, intindihin naman natin na mga intensive care patients do have a longer turnaround time. Sa isolation beds naman natin, we also increased the hospital beds. Kasi alam natin na there are also moderate cases na nag-ano din. They are increasing because of the increased number of positive cases. At saka meron ding step down ang serious patients to moderate bed to an isolation bed to consider them as moderate. So nakapagdagdag ho tayo ng 554 beds compared with last month. So itong ginagawa po natin is making sure na yung intensive care unit natin hindi aabot sa critical risk position, wherein it would be very hard for the healthcare workers and even the patients to access and get specialized care. So at the moment, Spock Harry, I think we are still continuing the number of beds to be allocated for the intensive care. So far, since last month, we were able to ramp up 367 of these intensive care unit beds in the different hospitals, and aside from the field modulars. And secondly, we also ramped up the isolation beds. So we are still continuing though ng ating pagplano na kailangan talaga madagdagan ng ating health capacity. So that is the reason why nagbukas na rin, nagpo-construct na rin yung 110 modular field hospital sa Lung Center and another 220 sa National Mental Hospital. These are potential specialized units or intensive care. Bukas bubuksan na rin natin ng modular hemodialysis ng National Kidney. Ito kasi yung problema noon, hindi malaman kung saan dadalahin yung mga kidney patients natin na nagda-dialyze, since nagpo-close yung mga freestanding dialysis at saka nagka-clog na sa NKTI at saka sa Jose Rodriguez Memorial Hospital. So this is the reason na bubuksan din natin tomorrow yung modular hemodialysis, especially for COVID, sa NKI, capable of handling mga 25 beds, pero kung 3 shifts siya, abot ng mga 60 patients per day. So ito yung malaking increase sa number of allocated beds natin and very specific for COVID-19. Back to you, Harry.
Maraming salamat, Yusek Vega. Yusek, kailan po kaya ma-adjust yung mga datos ng DOH to reflect the additional beds? Kasi po sa mga panahon ngayon, may mga kritiko nagsasabi na we're even worse off than India daw. No? So kinakailangan mapakita natin yung tamang utilization rate, lalong-lalo na ng mga ICU beds natin. So itong figure po ng DOH, kailan kaya nila papalitan na sa hanggang ngayon po, 700 pa lang ang ICU beds natin sa Metro Manila at 1,900 lang all over the Philippines. No? Dapat po mapalitan na yan. Kasi sa aking initial computation, kung madadagdagan na, kung magiging 1,000 ang total beds sa Metro Manila, ang percent utilization natin ay bababa to hindi ko na-compute. Pero I'm sure it will go down to around 60% or even less. No? So, kailan po kaya i-amend ng DOH itong mga total beds available for purposes of computing utilization rate?
Actually, ginagawa na yan, Secretary. In fact, last week, nag-usap na kami sa mga hospital chiefs. Ano? Kasi itong pagbago ho nito, kailangan po nila i-manage sa kanilang data bed tracker na sa kanila. So we have informed yung mga data managers po nila ng lahat ng mga hospitals yan sa NCR to be consistent in the number of beds and the number of severe cases that they have. So ultimately, ang maipalabas namin na out of, since last month na meron tayong 781, we have already expanded the allocated beds for ICU to 1,148. Or an increase of 367 beds po, Secretary.
So sana po ma-reflect na ito sa official datos ng baka mamaya nasa 50% utilization rate na lang po tayo na ICU beds. No? One last point po, nung ako po mismo ay naging biktima ng COVID, ay syempre po maraming nagsasalita na hindi raw makapasok ang mga pasyente sa ospital. Pero ang katotohanan, kung titignan po natin ang datos, sapat naman po ang mga kama natin, no? Pati sa ICU beds. At ang sinasabi po namin palagi dito sa ating press briefing, dapat tumawag doon sa One Hospital Command Center. So ito po, nagdial kami sa 155.
DOH protects your personal information in accordance to the rules and regulations set by the Data Privacy Act.
So ibig sabihin, nakukontak naman po yung 1555 na hotline po natin. No? So ang tanong ko lang po is, nung mga panahon po, right after my COVID, nagdagdag po ng 50 call centers ang MMDA at plano pong magdagdag din ng 50 ang DOH. No? Na nakapagdagdag na ba ho tayo ng 100 na call operators para sa ating hotline for the One COVID hotline?
Spokary, thank you. Pero alam mo, sa itong One COVID Referral Center natin or the One Hospital Command, kailangan talaga ma-update yung human resource at saka pangalawa yung technology. So sa human resource naman, nakahandle kami ng interviews, siguro may mga 85 nakapasa ho sa interview for possible deployment na po yan for calls for the receiving or call agents for the One Hospital Command. Pangalawa po, nag-i-improve na rin yung aming upgrade sa aming telecommunication. Kasi naka-hook up na kami sa DICT at saka sa PLDT po. Binigyan kami ng managed services through subscription na mag-open ng more lines. So yung 1555 po, yan ang initial namin. Pero pag once na ma-connect na talaga yung aming bagong hotline number na direct na sa One Hospital Command, ay magiging 1554 na yan. Pero we will announce it later because it still needs the connection. Pero as of the moment, we're trying to improve our function, our services po, to make sure that we will be able to connect the patients with us and do the coordinated and referral to Oplan Kalinga or to the different hospitals. Ngayon pong month na to, we have already made an agreement with PICC na lilipat ho kami doon because the MMDA complex is becoming small for the number of workers and the number of new gadgets that we have for the command. So siguro po mga middle of May, we will transfer and we will be able to provide you a better service and a better functionality. Kasi we hope na this will not just be for COVID, but even in post-COVID, we will have a national referral system all over the Philippines connecting the different hospitals, LGU, for access and even for financial services that are needed by the patient.
Well, congratulations sa USEC dahil sa totoo lang po, sinusundan po talaga namin yung capability na makontak ng One Hospital Command Center at kanina po pinarinig naman namin na sumasagot po ang 1555. Hindi gaya ng siguro mga 1 month or 2 months ago na busy ang lahat. So congratulations, Yusek Vega. At again, ang reminder po natin sa ating mga kababayan, kung nais nyo pong malaman kung sa kayo pupunta, tumawag lang po kayo sa mga numera ng One Hospital Command Center dahil kung hindi po talagang mangyayari sa inyo, baka mapuntahan ninyo, puno na po yung COVID bed allocation nila. So tawag lang po sa One Hospital Command Center. Kasama rin po natin, maraming salamat Yusek Vega. Ngayon, si Dr. Gloriani. Siya po ay isang miyembro ng DOST Vaccine Expert Panel, Dr. Nina Gloriani. Ma'am, ang tanong ko po, dumating na yung ating 15,000 trial order para sa Gamaleya Sputnik V, pero pagdating may balita na tila hindi po inaprubahan ng Brazil na nasa top 5 in terms of COVID cases itong Sputnik V. So, paano po natin may explain yung desisyon ng ating expert panel group na payagan at yung desisyon ninyo na ligtas at epektibo ang Sputnik V? The floor is yours, Dr. Gloriani.
Magandang hapon, Secretary Roque at kay Ambassador at kay Yusek Vega at sa lahat po. Ang Gamaleya COVID vaccine na Sputnik V po ay in-evaluate ng vaccine expert panel very thoroughly for safety, immunogenicity, and efficacy. In fact, nakapag-release na po kami yung information about that sa DOH bago po nung pinag-uusapan nila ang pag-roll out nga nitong unang 15 to 20,000 doses. So malinaw po, actually marami po kaming hininging mga datos na pinadala naman nila, like yun sa safety. Sinabi nila na nagkaroon ng mga ganitong adverse events, may namatay, hiningi po namin lahat ng datos na yon at binigay po nilang lahat yon. So in fairness po, it was the most comprehensive parang set of documents that we received from these vaccine companies, no? So ngayon, yung issue po naman dito sa Brazil, akala ko nga po, ang Brazil ay may ginawang pagsusuri experimentally tungkol dito sa sinasabi nilang nagre-replicate yung virus, pero binasehan lang po nila ay yung mga datos na merong sinasabing threshold. I don't know kung paano ko po ma-explain yun in a not technical way. Yung threshold ng posibleng merong konting replicating viruses, pero hindi necessarily nakita yon. So yun po ang pinag-uusapan. Mukhang na-misunderstand po nung Brazil yun, but of course we are closely monitoring ano magiging explanation on both sides. Pero sa palagay namin wala pong issue. Kasi yung mga ibang mga countries, at least we have 3, in real world conditions, wala pong naging problema sa safety or even sa efficacy nitong mga bakuna na ito. So masusi po nating susundan ano talaga ang mukhang meron pong hindi nagkakaugnay din sa hanay ng mga nasa Brazil kasi meron din pong mga espesyalista, mga immunologists and other scientists na nagulat na mukhang may hindi naintindihan dun sa mga dokumento ng Sputnik V. Yun po, Secretary Roque.
At Dr. Gloriani, di ba po sa lahat ng bakuna na pinag-aralan ninyo, parang Sputnik V lang ang pinuntahan mismo ng mga miyembro ng expert panel yung manufacturing facility. Tama ba ho ito?
Hindi po kami pumunta dyan.
Hindi po.
Kay Ambassador kami pumunta.
Okay. Maraming salamat po. Okay, now bago tayo magpatuloy, no, just yung computation po at 700 beds at 70% utilization, kung gagawin po yung 1,148 total beds, ang utilization rate po ay bababa po ng 42.68. Okay, pumunta na po tayo pero Dr. Gloriani, may isa pa akong tanong sa inyo. May mga kritiko na nagsasabi na mas malala pa raw ang Pilipinas kesa sa India. Tama ba ho ito?
Naku, unfair naman po yan. In fairness, ang ating mortality rate ay mababa. Maaaring tumaas ngayon and we attribute that to the variants po. So medyo naging lax din po ang ating mga mamamayan. Yan yun, nung nag-umpisa yan. Kasi tinignan din po namin, no? Sinusundan namin, nag-flatten tayo ng epidemic curve. Tapos by February, March, ayun, umakyat na naman po. Kasi marami na rin pong naging lax. So I think that is unfair to say that. And siguro hindi naman din kasi yung sa India naman nangyari dahil din po siguro yung kanilang mga religious festivities tas yung kanilang double variant ngayon na we hope wala pa po sa atin. Mukhang malakas yung tama nung double variant na yon in terms of higher talaga po ang transmissibility niya at base do sa mga naging press releases ng kanilang mga eksperto actually kagabi, no, sinasabi na kahit mga bata ay medyo severe, medyo ibang klase po sigurong variant ito than what we would normally get from yung UK, yung South Africa. Medyo kakaiba po. So, hindi ko po makakumpara yung Pilipinas at yung nangyayari sa India.
Last na, ma'am, no? Meron pong report na isang pulis na namatay matapos siya maturukan ng Sinovac. Meron na ba hong ebidensya na yung pagkamatay nitong pulis na ito ay dahil po sa Sinovac?
Ay, iimbestigahan po sir yan ng ating NICIC kasi yun yung agency natin, National Adverse Events Following Immunization Committee, natitingnan yan. Well, hindi po natin ina-expect na kahit sino na nabakunahan ay mamamatay. Maari pong meron yan ibang kondisyon na nakapagdulot nung yung to be a heart attack or something, pero hindi po related.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Nina Gloriani, Department of Science and Technology, Vaccine Expert Panel Head. Pumunta na po tayo sa ating open forum. Yusek Roque, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Secretary Roque, sa ating po mga bisita. From NJ Blanca Flor of Daily Tribune, President Duterte signed the 1.3 billion pesos free Wi-Fi project into law in 2017. Will he include an update on the project in his last State of the Nation address this July?
Well, I have a personal interest po dito sa libreng Wi-Fi dahil ako po'y naging pangunahing autor ng libreng Wi-Fi na batas, no, noong 17th Congress. At ang tapatan lang po mula noon hanggang ngayon, talagang medyo nakakabahala po yung bagal ng pag-implement itong libreng Wi-Fi. No? Sa katunayan po, dapat magbibigay po tayo ng 120,000 na libreng Wi-Fi site, no, sa buong Pilipinas at mga 10,000 lang po ang meron tayo ngayon. No? Kaya nga po yung mga tanong dito tungkol sa di umano itong foreign contractor neto ay nagpasok ng mga imported component na undervalued at na nagtangkapan na manuhol. Well, ganito po ang posisyon natin dyan. No? Yung kontrata pong yan ay pinasok pa sa panahon ni dating Acting Secretary Yusek Rio at ito po ay in cooperation with UNDP. Now, we had high hopes po dahil nandiyan naman po yung mga multilateral agencies dyan na mabilis yung rollout, no? Pero mabagal nga po, no? And with this latest controversy, ang position po talaga ng Presidente at ng DICT ay itigil na yung involvement nitong current contractor na foreign contractor neto at ibalik na yung mga pera na naibayad na sa kanila dahil po pwede na pong ipagpatuloy yan ng ating DICT. Yung mga panahon po yan na tinuloy yan dahil nga po wala pang kakayahan yung ating DICT mismo magpatayo nitong mga libreng Wi-Fi sites nito. Pero ngayon po, may ganyang kakayahan ng mag-rollout ang DICT at sa katunayan po na sa taong 2020 alone, nakapag-install po ang DICT ng 500% more Wi-Fi sites compared dun sa mga total na in-install ng itong foreign contractor na ito from the year 2015 to 2019. So ang current status po niyan, well, bilang isang pangunahing autor ng batas, syempre po, hindi tayo happy. Kinakailangan, ang pangako natin, libreng Wi-Fi sa lahat. Dapat magkaroon pa rin ng katuparan sa administrasyon ni Presidente Duterte and we have 1 year to go. And considering na 10,000 palang sites po ang natatayo out of 120, kailangan double time talaga. Pero with the recent performance of the ICT na 500% ang kanilang mas maraming sites na naitayo compared to the past 5 years, no? 2015 to be accurate, no? Ako nawala na, but I think for the past 5 years, we have confidence po na kung hindi man maabot yung 10,000, close to 10,000 makakabit natin. Kasi po, talagang yan po yung inaasahan lalong-lalo na ng mga millennials sa Pilipinas at importante po ang Wi-Fi talaga na isang human rights na po yan, karapatang pantao na po yan. Ang tawag po dyan, right to connectivity. So asahan nyo po na habang nakaupo pa si Presidente, siya naman po ang nag-certify urgent ang batas na yan. Kaya naipasa ko ng mabilis po yan sa mababang kapulungan. Titingnan naman po natin kung talagang mapapatupad natin yan. No? 10,000 sites installed, 120,000, so 110,000 sites left to go. Pero sa bilis naman po ng galaw ng DICT ngayon, we have confidence that we can meet at least close to the target, if not 110,000 more sites.
Second question po niya, the BOC caught Speedcast, the contractor daw po tasked to import the telco equipment needed for the Wi-Fi project, undervaluing its shipment and bribing customs workers to get away with it. As far as Palace is concerned daw po, should the government suspend or kick out Speedcast from the project for allegedly violating customs laws?
Yan po ay iimbestigahan ng DICT. Pero syempre po, may penal clause na tinatawag ang ating Customs and Tariff Code na meron ding kriminal na parusa doon sa mga lalabag sa Customs and Tariff Code at kasama na po dyan yung mga nag-undervalue. No? Kasi technical smuggling po yan kung nag-undervalue. Pero gaya ng sinabi ko po kanina, talagang hindi po happy ang gobyerno sa performance nitong ating contractor. Pasensyahan na po, no? But as an author of the free Wi-Fi law, di po katanggap-tanggap, no, na many years after we passed this into law, 10,000 sites pa lang ang kakabit. So, I think ang position po ay gumawa na ng hakbang ang DICT na ibalik na nga po yung mga sobrang bayad na naibigay dyan sa foreign contractor na yan, bayaran sila sa mga na-install nilang site, pero ngayon po mas mabilis pang DICT mag-install ng mga libreng Wi-Fi site.
Yung third question po nila, the heads of the Senate Committee on Public Services and the House Committee on Good Government and Accountability have expressed their intent to probe the Wi-Fi project over alleged smuggling, bribery, and negligence on the part of the DICT. Will the palace launch its own investigation?
Yes, it's being investigated now by the DICT, and we support any further investigation to be conducted by the legislative branch of government as part of their oversight functions.
Thank you, Secretary.
Maraming salamat, Yusek. Punta tayo kay Mela Lesmoras, please.
Hi, good afternoon, Secretary Roque at sa ating mga guests po. Secretary Roque, unang question lang po on OFW concerns. Sa Malacanang side, ano po kaya yung latest orders ni Pangulong Duterte para nga ma-ensure yung kapakanan ng ating mga kababayan abroad, like sa India and other countries may COVID-19 surge, and even sa Hong Kong may nakaambang forced COVID-19 vaccine requirement po?
Well, unang-una po, no, we ask our OFWs, of course, na sumunod po doon sa mask, hugas, iwas kasi yan lang po talaga ang sandata natin. Pangalawa, naghahanda na nga po tayo nung mga hakbang para sa repatriation, gaya ng sinabi ni Ambassador Rabon Bagatsing, pero I think there will have to be a minimum number, di ba po, Ambassador, no? Para tayo maka-charter ng eroplano, no? At iiwi sila, no? At siguro po, it will be sometime in the future kasi the total ban is until the 14th. Pero that's only like, 12 days to go, 11 days to go, matatapos na rin yung ban. Pangatlo po, iniinganyo po natin ating mga OFWs na magpabakuna rin po sa kung nasaan man sila kasi ang alam ko po, ang pagbabakuna naman ay sinasakop ang lahat. No? We are not safe until everyone is safe. No? Yan po ang motto sa buong daigdig. At pang-apat po, ay meron naman po tayong consular at iba pang assistance na binibigay para dun sa magkakasakit at babawian ng buhay. No? Napakalaki po ng ginagastos natin ngayon para sa pag-uwi ng mga OFWs natin na nawalan ng trabaho at handa pa rin po tayong iuwi ang lahat ng gustong umuwi, lalong-lalo na yung mga nagkasakit na, pero siyempre po, no, may limitation, kinakailangan ma-observe muna yung mandatory quarantine period bago po ma-repatriate. No? So yan po, wala pong tigil at nung last time po, sinabi ko nga po, halos 10 bilyon na ang ating nagastos para po tulungan ang ating mga OFW sa panahon po ng pandemya.
Opo. And may second question, Secretary Roque, on COVID-19 vaccines po. Meron po kaya tayong specific date na inaay na ito ang pagdating ng mas malaking bulto ng Sputnik V vaccines? And idagdag ko lang, Secretary Roque, kasi dati po nasabi ni Pangulong Duterte na ang preferred vaccine niya ay from China or Russia. Ngayong malabo pa yung detalye sa Sinopharm, magpapabakuna na po kaya si Pangulong Duterte using Sputnik V naman po?
Sa una, tanungin natin si Ambassador, no? Kasi ang dumating is 15,000 from the initial 500,000 or, ay hindi pala, sorry po, si Ambassador pala is from India, no? So anyway, ang date po, alam ko, it's within the month of May. Di ko lang po na memorya kung kailan, no? Pero importante po na magkaroon tayo ng trial order kasi negative 18 to 20 Celsius po ang temperature requirement ng Sputnik ng Gamaleya V, no? Kaya po sa Metro Manila ibibigay po yan. Bukas po magkakaroon tayo ng on-the-site briefing sa Parañaque, isa po dun sa syudad na kung saan gagamitin po nila itong Sputnik V. So Mayor Olivares, kasama po namin kayo bukas.
Opo. And sa pagbabakuna lang po, sir, ni Pangulong Duterte, may
tatanungin
chance
ko po
kaya
siya.
na Sputnik V po?
I'm happy to announce that finally I am allowed to attend the meetings with the President in person, and tatanungin ko po siya mamaya if he will now consider Sputnik V.
Opo. Panghuli na lang, Secretary Roque. So, ibig sabihin po ba may talk to the people mamaya?
Meron po, meron po. And I'm looking forward to it because isang buwan po ako hindi naka-in-person attendance sa mga talk to the people.
Okay. Salamat po, Secretary Roque, at sa ating mga guests.
Salamat, Mela. Punta tayo kay Yusek Roque, please.
Yes, okay, Secretary. Tanong mula kay Chris Jose ng Remate Online. Paki-clarify daw po and expound yung sinabi nyo last Friday that food and personal care establishment can operate beyond 10% capacity if they comply with JMC number 21-01 or 2021 daw po ito. I think joint memorandum circular ito. How hard is it to comply with this circular? Pahingi rin daw po ng examples.
Hindi naman po mahirap yan, no? Unang-una, kinakailangan lahat po ng regulatory requirements ay at registration ay complied nung establishmento, no? Kasama po dyan mga mayor's permit, mga DTI SEC registration or DOT accreditation. Pangalawa po, dapat gumagamit sila ng staysafe.ph or kung anumang contact tracing tools na integrated sa StaySafe, no? So importante po yan. Pangatlo, kinakailangan meron silang kakayahan at napatunayan ng kakayahan na magpatupad ng minimum health standards. Kasama na po yung limitation sa seating at saka yung sa ventilation. Importante po yung ventilation, yung engineering alteration ng establishments to promote ventilation. At meron po kasing certification process yan. Kung meron talaga silang napatunahang kakayahan na, bibigyan sila ng safety seal. Kaya nga po ang sinasabi natin sa ating mga kababayan, let us patronize po yung mga establishments na meron ng safety seal dahil napatunayan na po yan na may kakayahan silang magpatupad ng minimum health standards.
Okay. Yung susunod pong tanong ay mula kay John Punsalan ng ABS-CBN Online. Das Malacanang approved daw po DFA Secretary Locsin's statement that China should get the F out of the West Philippine Sea. Is the use of expletive a signal that the Philippines is changing its rhetoric and diplomatic tactic against Beijing?
Hindi po namin pinaghihimasukan ang karapatan ng malayang pananalita ni Secretary Locsin.
Thank you, Secretary.
Punta po tayo kay Hannah Sancho, please.
Hi, Secretary. Good afternoon po.
Good afternoon, Hannah.
Secretary, yes, sir. Yung grupo po ng mga nurses po, sir, ininadaing po nila yung hindi po pantay yung sweldo po ng mga Nurse 1 at Nurse 2. Sinasabi rin po nila hanggang ngayon, hindi pa rin po sila nakakatanggap na benepisyo po tulad ng mga food allowance. At hiling po nila na kung maaari ay makipagdialogo po sila sa Department of Budget and Management. Ano po ito ng palasyo po, sir?
Well, siguro si Yusek Vega. I'm sorry, Yusek Vega, no? But I have to put you on the spot dahil you're also acting OIC as Yusek for Finance ng DOH. So ang tanong po nila is, again, number one, yung difference ng sweldo sa Nurse 1 and Nurse 2 at saka yung hindi natatanggap na, anong allowance? Food allowance?
Food allowance and hazard pay din po,
and
sir.
hazard pay. Yusek Vega?
Okay, thank you, Hannah, for the query. Alam nyo, yung starting position talaga ng Nurse 1, as abided by DBM because of the Supreme Court ruling, Nurse 1 becomes from 11 to salary grade 15. Ito po yung victorious na yung pagpasok ng Nurse 1 entry level, pero na-distort po yung pay grade nila kasi halos pareho na sila ng Nurse 2. Ito yung sinasabi ng Department of Health na we need to adjust the Nurse 2 position into a higher level grade para hindi naman sila pare-pareho ng Nurse 1. So yung aming ngayon proposal for a higher salary grade for Nurse 2 is with DBM right now kasi hindi kaagad magkaroon ng resolution dahil kailangan nga daw sabi ng DBM a legal basis to do that. And we are also writing the Senate committee sa Congress, both houses, para malaman din yung situation wherein the Nurse 2 should have a higher grade position. And that is the position na actually ng Department of Health na dapat mas mataas ng salary grade yung Nurse 2 position. Ayun naman dun sa food allowance, kung lahat ng mga regional centers at saka regional health offices at saka regional centers po under the Department of Health, binaba na ho namin, sinapalat na namin yan since last year, yung food allowance. Pero yung sa corporate facilities, lalong-lalo na dito sa Metro Manila, Heart Center Kidney Institute, gusto ho nila ang disbursement po noon, yung lalo na yung food provision into food allowance. So sinasabi na po namin to na sinabi ng COA sa amin na kailangan talaga may imprimatur ang President for converting a food provision to a food allowance. So ang sinulatan na ho namin yung Office of the Executive Secretary po tungkol nga dyan. And secondly, we have already talked with the Alliance of Health Workers na sinabihan po namin that the only way to do that for provision to cash would be through the Executive Secretary, through the President. So yun yung ngayon. These are the issues pending. And for the hazard, alam nyo, yung since last year, nabigay na namin yung hazard and even the special risk allowance. Tapos na ho yun. But what we are asking for DBM right now is the hazard pay from January to June of this year. So we're asking a budget for that because hindi na kinaya ng Bayanihan 2. So we're hoping that we will be given that provision from DBM. So ano na ho namin, we can actually easily download yung hazard pay and the special risk allowance.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yusek Baga, no need na po ba na magsagawa pa ng dialogue yung Philippine Nurses Association with the DBM po?
We had a dialogue last Saturday with the Nursing Association, and they invited DBM, pero wala yung DBM doon. So probably they will ask DBM to honor their invitation the next time around.
All right, thank you, Yusek Baga. Secretary, meron pong tanong dito. Is there, like the ambassador said, they cannot donate excess vaccines to the Philippines because of contracts with pharmaceutical companies. What are the options of the government?
So far po, we may have to talk to the manufacturers to allow it, no? Kasi it was their condition, no? Pero we'll see po, anything can be agreed upon naman po, no?
Sir, last question ko na lang, sir, regarding dun sa Hong Kong, sir. Mandatory po na kailangan yung mga OFWs, kailangan po nila magpa-vaccinate ng COVID-19 vaccine. Sinasabi kasi ng Consul na parang sinisingle out lang po daw yung mga OFWs natin. And sinasabi din ni Foreign Secretary Locsin, dapat lahat ng nationality, hindi lang Filipino. Ano po posisyon ng Philippines po ito? Sinasabi ng Dole, sir, hindi sagot ang OFW sa planong mandatory ng COVID-19 vaccination ng Hong Kong sa foreign domestic workers po.
Well, we go with the statement of Secretary Locsin, of course. No? Alam niyo po, ang Equal Protection Clause is not just a provision in the Philippine Bill of Rights. It is accepted already in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. At sakop po ng kanyang applicability ang Hong Kong. So sana po, wag i-single out ang ating mga Filipino OFWs. Bagamat we recognize yung sovereign prerogative na i-require ang bakuna. Let me tell everyone po na we have an early 1905 case na sinustain po ng Korte Suprema ng Pilipinas ang mandatory vaccination against smallpox as forming part and parcel of police power. Pero pati po ang exercise of police power, it must be done in a manner na lahat po ng tao ay sasakupin. Wag naman pong magkakaroon ng singling out.
Alright. Thank you, Secretary.
Maraming salamat po, Hana. And Hana, buti na lang nandito si Yusek Vega. Actually, ang request ko lang po, yung mga factual questions ay ipadala nyo po ahead of time because I would not have known how to answer your question. Buti na lang po nandito si Yusek Vega. So please submit po ahead of time your factual questions para mapadala natin sa appropriate line agency. Okay, we now proceed with Yusek Roque, please.
Yes, thank you, Secretary. Tanong mula kay Laila Salaberry of Inquirer para po kay Ambassador Bagaching. Could you provide lang daw po updates sa COVID-positive Filipinos in India? How are they doing and what kind of healthcare are they receiving in light of the crisis in the country?
Salamat, Yusek Roque. No? So far, we have received about 73 cases COVID-positive na Pilipino dito sa atin. And sa tulong ng PhilCom, what we have done is to create, provide them all the information and the numbers that they can communicate with the embassy. Importante is access and the lines of communication are open. So they can get in touch with us through Facebook and then our email address. And PhilCom here have put up a chat group. And because of that, sa tulong ng DFA, we have arranged a system where yung mga COVID support group ang tawag dyan, in terms of medicines and supplies and food requirements, we can address their issues. No? Kasi napakalaki ng India. You know, it would take you 2.5 hours to fly from Delhi to Chennai. So we have satellite groups of Filipino communities. At nag-text siya, nag-chat group kami, sinasabi ito sitwasyon ng isang Pilipino. So yung mga Pilipino sa lugar na yun na nagtutulungan and the embassy provides as much support as we can on our own. But we have the go signal from the DFA that we had a town hall meeting last Friday with the Filipino community here. Nag-usap-usap sila. At nakita naman ng DFA ang pangangailangan ng ating mga kababayan. Tanda naman tumulong. So with that, very, very good coordination and support nakukuha namin from the PhilCom, the DFA, and the embassy.
Thank you, Ambassador. For Secretary Roque, how does Malacanang view the report that 25 billion in calamity funds from 2020 and 2021 were still unutilized as of March, as these are still pending approval? Why is this the case when spending these funds is supposed to be urgent in this time of a pandemic?
Well, unang-una po, ayon po kay Secretary Wendell Avisado, and I will quote him, yung mga calamity funds pong yan ay release as the need arises. We cannot just release without any reason or justification. Yung natural calamities daw po ay hindi nangyayari sa isang beses lamang, so kinakailangan i-release po yan kapag naghumingi po in response to a particular disaster or natural calamity. Now, at syempre po, yung pag-release niyan, meron ding approval ng ating presidente. Nasa Mayo pa lang po tayo. So, yung budget sa 2021, syempre po, nandyan pa yan. Dahil hindi naman dapat gastusin lahat. No? Dahil baka mamaya, yung ibang aberya mangyayari sa 2021, wala na po tayong pondo. No? Now, si Yusek Halad naman po, who is head of NDRMMC, ay kinontak din natin. At ang sinabi po niya in response to the headline article sa isang periodiko ngayon, sinama daw po kasi dun sa halaga na allegedly unspent yung budget for 2021. And as explained by Secretary Wendell, no, syempre kinakailangan hindi mo gastusin lahat yan dahil yung calamity funds mo for 2021 is until December of 2021. Pero ito po ang breakdown na binigay sa akin ni Yusek Halad, ang head po ng NDRRMC. Sa 2021 po, 20 billion ang budget nila, inclusive of 13 billion regular NDRRMF funds, 5 billion Marawi Rehabilitation Fund, 2 billion insurance premium, no, for government assets against calamities. Ang naapruban po ng OP ay 2,818,792. Ang balanse po niya is 15,181,27. Now, ang on-process po mga proyekto na popondohan ay 8.23 billion. No? Tapos meron din pa po silang identified needs from effects of Typhoon Quinta, Rolly, Ulysses na 35 billion. No? So makikita natin na in fact kulang yung natitirang pondo for 2021 for what is needed as a result of Quinta, Rolly, and Ulysses of 31 billion. Pagdating naman po doon sa 2020, 16 billion po yung budget ng NDRMMC, nagkaroon po ng augmentation, naging 22 billion 794,698, less OP approved 20 billion 771,925. Ang balance lang po nila is 2 billion 22. So parang bloated po yung nasa pahayagan na hindi po ginagastos na natural calamity funds. Siyempre po, hindi gagastosin lahat dahil kinakailangan mag-save ng pondo para sa darating na calamity funds at yun nga po, no, marami ring mga kinakailangan pa para sa Quinta, Rolly at Ulysses. So wag po kayong maalala, magagastos po lahat yan.
Opo, yung second question po niya, what will it do to fast-track daw po the release of the funds, especially since it is relying on the 2021 budget to stimulate the economy?
Let me correct you po, no? Kasi as Secretary Wendell says, the release of the funds, hindi po pinag-aawayan yan. It's been released to the appropriate agency. Ang appropriate agency po for the calamity funds is NDRMMC. Yung pag-release naman ng NDRMMC has to be in response to a specific natural disaster. So, at saka subject to OP approval. At nung mga figures na binasa ko po, nagpapakita na wala naman pong delay na masyado. No? Siyempre po, may paperwork. Alam niyo naman talaga yan. Ganyan talaga sa gobyerno. Hindi ka pwedeng gumastos-gastos ng walang compliance with COA requirements. No? Pero hindi po naman totoo yung lumalabas na balita na para bagang ang dami nang nangyaring abirya, nandiyan ang katutak na pera na hindi naman po nagagastos.
Thank you, Secretary.
Yes, Trish Tiradov, CNN, please.
Hi, good afternoon, Spokes, and to Yusek Bongvega and to Dr. Lina po. Sir, first lang po, since you mentioned about foresight, but of course, this is on a different topic, I just wanted to ask where the IATF is in terms of planning or handling the COVID response in light of the new variants, because we understand there are some efforts to increase the number of beds, isolation facilities. But is the IATF already at the point of anticipating or having some sort of foresight? Yung sa scenario na nangyayari, for example, in India, should worse come to worse, do we have a plan A or plan B? Have we or are we securing medicines and oxygen tanks already in case of a worst case scenario?
I will respond to that first. Nakita niyo po na with the additional ICU beds that we have, bumaba na po to 42% ang utilization rate natin. Although this is subject to verification kasi ako lang nag-compute. Kasi nga sa datos ng DOH, and let's flash that on the screen again, 700 pa lang ang ICU beds natin. This has been increased to 100. Now, are we going to stop at 1,000? No. We are proceeding to come up with additional ICU beds as mentioned by Yusek Vega, and Yusek Vega will confirm that ako na on my own, as a result of my own hospitalization experience, no, I'm pushing for at least 200 additional ICU beds. No? So that's part and parcel of the foresight. Kasi nga, we can never say if what happened to India will not happen. Kaya nga po tayo nagta-travel ban ngayon. No? Pero ang warning nga po ng WHO, kinakailangan isama rin sa travel ban yung mga lugar kung saan mataas ang traffic involving passengers from India. At kasama po dyan yung Middle East. So yan po ang problema ngayon dahil hindi naman natin po pwedeng iban ang mga bansa, ang mga biyahero galing sa Middle East, lalong-lalo na dahil ang dami nating OFWs doon, no? So pero pinag-aaralan po ngayon yan. So yung pagdadagdag pa, pagpapalaki ng ating healthcare capacity is the long-term plan right now, because we all know that it's cheaper to invest in health infrastructure rather than to close the economy muli. So I think that with the additional beds that we have provided, no, I think pagdating po ng 14 at the end of the MECQ, there will be confidence in announcing another qualification for classification, no, for Metro Manila and the surrounding provinces. Perhaps si Yusek Vega could add to what I just said. Ano daw yung mahakbang na ginagawa natin by way of foresight to address an India-like pandemic?
Okay, thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Spock Harry. For foresight, you have to deal really with certain strategies on different platforms. The first is the suppression of the virus. I think the IATF is very well ahead in terms of making sure that the virus will not spread, will not replicate to an extent that we will be having a hard time in terms of our capacity. Nakita naman natin na we are always looking into the angle that if we have to do general quarantine or enhanced quarantine, this has to be based on the data that we have on the ground. So foresight and the suppression means, especially with the IATF, that they're always looking for data that the variants should not spread, they should be contained, and the PDITR, especially for contact tracing, isolation, and testing must be there. In other words, expanding the isolation, contact tracing. So I think the IATF has been always on that strategy. The second strategy or the platform that we should look into also is in the health capacity, meaning to say the number of beds, the number of isolation facilities and quarantine. I think for the longest time, we've been trying to adjust, especially since learning from the last pandemic, how we can best improve our health system's capacity by improving on our infrastructure and making sure we have the desired human resource and, of course, the technology or the equipment for it. And I think that the last foresight that they're also looking and strategizing is really on vaccination. And you can see that the plans of the vaccine cluster is in a list wherein they have been trying to program and plan for the different vaccines that are coming, because our vaccination can really start as much as we would like to do if the supply is there. And so, but they have been planning for this, since last year. So in other words, for me, the IATF has always been on the forefront in terms of strategizing, especially on those three fronts, on how best we can resolve this pandemic.
Thank you, sir. Sir, just a clarification dun po sa nabanggit ni Spokes na another classification for NCR+. How likely is it that we're going to shift to GCQ after May 14, given the higher number of beds or higher number of healthcare capacity by that time?
We still have to make sure that the number of cases has really decreased, and that our efforts to suppress the virus is there, and the transmission rate is below 1 or even below a minimum figure, to make sure that the virus or the variant doesn't replicate. So we'll see, and what the trend would be at that time, and the IATF will actually decide, especially on the attack rate, and of course the 2-week growth rate and the health capacity of the region or NCR.
Thank you, Sec Vega. Sir, next question maybe for Secretary Roque. Sir, si Ambassador Bagaching mentioned that, or to Ambassador Bagaching po, no? He mentioned that the Bharat Biotech can immediately ship out the vaccines once all documentary processes have been expedited. What's keeping the processing of vaccine documents long, and considering, sir, na may EUA na siya, especially ngayon na may directive din po si Pangulo na hindi dapat tumagal ng 3 days yung pagpuproseso ng mga dokumento or yung mga regulatory work po.
Ambassador Bagatsing?
Yes, thank you. Well, my information is that there's still one document required by the FDA to have a full approval, no, for the EUA of Ulat Biotech for the vaccine, Covaxin. And the other requirement, I believe, was on the Department of Finance review on their pricing scheme. So if those two hurdles are settled, then the orders can be made and the shipments can follow. So yun lang po ang balita ko na regulatory requirements na kinakailangan pa nilang tapusin.
Pero sir, when do you see it happening? And 8 million isang dadating po ba yun? I mean, probably this month.
Well, as I said, it's a moving target. Ang guarantee lang sa akin is once full approval is secured, then we can roll out and export the vaccines there. And the point is, here in India, anything related to vaccine, and no offense to anybody, anything related to vaccines, cures, medicines, etc., the regulatory process is expedited, no? So that approval is secured right away. And the bottom line, whatever medicines are out there, equipments that are necessary, it goes straight to the recipients, the patients, and the families who need this kind of medicines. So just a point lang, Tricia, no, if you don't mind, Secretary, just to give you a perspective here. From October last year to March, the cases of COVID here was 5.9 million. This whole month of April, the COVID cases was 6.9 million. In other words, in 1 month's time, they had 6.9 million compared to 6 months from October to March, 5.9. So yan ang nakakabulaga. And they were really caught unprepared. Sabi nga ni Modi, this is once in a century crisis. So if there's anything, lessons that we can learn, just consider that, no? And the cases of death, from November to March, the cases of death was 40,800. In 1 month, this April, cases of death, 48,700. So you could just see how overwhelmed the healthcare services were. So tuloy-tuloy pa rin ang vaccine. Going back to your point, tuloy-tuloy pa rin ang vaccine. Importante talaga na one way or another, mas strengthen natin ang ating immune system through these vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Secretary Roque, just one last question for you. Si General Sinas is retiring this week, May 8. Who will be the next PNP chief? Will the President be making the announcement soon? Will there be an extension? And sino po yung mga contenders natin ngayon?
I know he has made a decision, but I'm not at liberty to announce anything unless I have the paper, the appointment paper. And this is a well-established practice of my office.
Thank you, Spokes.
Thank you very much, Trish. We go back to Yusek Roque, please.
Yes, thank you, Secretary. From Adrian Ayalin of ABS-CBN, may mga binuksang industriya under MECQ pero wala pang bakuna ang mga economic frontliners. Binuksan sila kasi kailangan pero paano daw po ang protection nila?
Mask, hugas, iwas. At pagdating po ng bakuna, idagdag ang bakuna.
Yung una pong tanong ni Kylie Atienza ng Business World ay nabanggit niya na Secretary sa tanong ni Laila Salaveria, yung unutilized fund. Pero ang kanya pong follow-up, in a tweet yesterday, former Socio-Economic Planning Secretary Ernesto Pernia said the government's lack of sense of urgency has clearly shown in responding to and managing the pandemic. He said the health system hardly improved and pandemic response spending is the lowest in ASEAN. Wala ba po daw sense of urgency ang administrasyon sa gitna ng pandemya? Does the administration plan to fast-track the release of the unspent calamity funds?
Well, una-una po, no? Hindi naman po talaga unspent calamity funds yan kasi meron po talaga nakareserba. Ulitin ko po, nakareserba talaga yan dahil Mayo pa lang may mga darating pang mga aberya. Now, pangalawa po, nakita nyo naman po yung expansion natin ng ating healthcare capacity, gumagawa tayo ng modular hospitals, na-increase natin ng ICU beds, at magpapatuloy po yan. No? Hindi po tayo titigil. No? At pagdating po sa lack of sense of urgency, sa tingin ko naman po, dahil lahat po tayo ay merong mga kamag-anak na po pwede magkasakit, ako nagkasakit na, hindi po naman tama na walang lack of certainty dahil lahat tayo nais nating to spare as many of our family friends, our family and friends from this vicious virus.
Thank you, Secretary.
Okay, Melo Acuña, please.
Good afternoon, Secretary. This is for you and for the good Ambassador Bhagat Singh. Do you see scenario similar to Australia, where Australia barred Australian nationals from returning to their country from India. Those who will violate will either be fined or jailed. Do you see such a situation in the Philippines?
Well, alam niyo po, may ruling na tayo, no? Manglapus, Marcos versus Manglapus, na the right to return is a human right. Pero, it is subject to police power. So, yung ating quarantine restrictions has also been recognized by the Supreme Court as a valid exercise of police power. Pero sa tingin ko naman po, ngayon, yung ating travel ban, which applies equally to Filipinos, no, is a similar measure adopted by the Philippine government. Kasi dati-rati talaga, dahil sabi ni Presidente, walang Pilipinong gusto umuwi na po pwedeng pigilan, may exception tayo sa mga travel bans to allow the return of Filipinos. Pero pagdating po dito sa India, for the first time, wala pong exception. No? Pero, syempre po, mananaig pa rin yung puso ng ating Presidente para sa ating mga OFWs. At ang nakikita ko po, baka nga po makakauwi na yung ilang mga Pilipinong gusto makauwi, pero subject to stricter quarantine dito sa Pilipinas, including full 14-day quarantine regardless of their PCR results.
Yeah. Mr. Ambassador, there are 1,319 Filipinos in your area of responsibility, with 73 afflicted with COVID-19. What are the chances of seeing them returning to the Philippines?
Well, as soon as we hurdle those logistical difficulties, including the travel ban imposed by our government effective until May 14, no? And getting the go signal from Secretary Locsin, we will do our best to bring them home. Again, as I said, the easiest way is to commercial flights. And once the Middle East lifts the travel ban, because anywhere you go right now from India, via Hong Kong, via Singapore, or even via Australia or the United States, there are travel bans in these countries. So there is a de facto travel ban. So once these are lifted, these are the logistical nightmares we have to go through. Once these are lifted, then we can start the process of negotiations for them to come home. Worst case scenario, we have talked with our defense attaché airlines to a military plane to ferry our kababayans from here to Manila.
Yeah, thank you very much. Secretary Harry, there are courses requiring practicum, like those who'd like to become teachers undergo practice teaching, and nurses are deployed to hospitals, or would-be nurses are deployed to hospitals. Don't you think there will be some changes in the curriculum, because it may in a way affect their training and education, Mr. Secretary?
Well, I think it's case to case. In the case of yung medical schools, they have been asked for resumption of their internship, and of course, it is part of the national interest to make sure na meron tayong sapat na mga doktor, so pinapayagan po sila ng IATF. So lahat naman po na mayroong mga valid na dahilan para ipagpatuloy yung kanilang mga internship, mga practice teaching, lahat po sila po pwedeng humingi lang ng permiso sa IATF.
I see. Yeah, for Undersecretary Vega, Mr. Undersecretary, good afternoon. Have you noticed any turnover or the speed of turnover of doctors, nurses, medtechs, and other professionals in government facilities over the past 12 months?
Thank you, Mel, for the query. Right now, what we're seeing actually is internal migration coming from the private sectors to the government. There's a big difference in pay scale, no? Alam naman natin yan lahat. So in the last, I think last year and even the last few years, we have seen this kind of a transition, an internal migration, mostly from private institutions to government, because the government has a higher pay scale compared to the private.
I see. So no problem with manpower?
Right now, in terms of manpower, that's really a challenge because not only are we dealing with internal migration, but there is also external, yung talagang pumupunta abroad because they have already the contracts on and so forth. And the challenge really here, especially with in a setup wherein you need specialized units, ito yung highly skilled personnel. And you know, when you deal with highly skilled personnel like nurses and even doctors, they need to have some training. And this is actually what some hospitals are doing right now to cope up with the gaps. Talagang they're trying to put in the necessary, halimbawa, training in the intensive care units, and this will nabigyan sila ng CME units for this so that they can also, this will also be a parang a gauge whether they can apply in a higher level position, or even go for work abroad or in government. So there's a very dynamic really with changes in the human resource, especially among nurses and doctors here in the Philippines.
Maybe next time we can come up with figures so that we will have a clearer picture, Mr. Undersecretary.
Yeah, yes, we can do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much,
Secretary Harry,
Nelo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Punta naman tayo kay Joseph Morong, please. Joseph Morong. Habang,
Secretary.
yeah, okay.
Sir,
go ahead.
kapala kayo yan. Nakiba mo na?
Okay, Secretary, ano?
Go ahead, Dr. Roque.
Okay, from Jenaline Kabiling of Manila Bulletin, Secretary Roque.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Has the President reached out Chinese President Xi Jinping to demand the pull-out of the Chinese ships in the West Philippine Sea and ease the tension? Will the President consider revising his calibrated and calculated foreign policy on the West Philippine Sea and ask for outside help after China ignored the Philippines' protest against unlawful presence of their ships in our territory?
Let me check that the President was ignored. No, that's not true. Dati po almost 200 ata yung mga barko dyan. Ngayon, kakaunti na lang po ang natitira. Kaya nga po ang pakiusap natin, tuluyan na ang lumisan sa lugar na yan. Now, let me also clear na yung pinag-uusapin natin ngayon, bagamat kabahagi ng Philippine claim to the Kalayaan Group of Islands, has never been in the possession of the Philippines. Para pong sabay na may claim tayo na hindi naman natin na-possess. Yung area po ngayon na kung saan nagtipon-tipon yung mga mangingisda, yan po yung area kung saan malapit yung mga isla na pinag-aagawan sa parte po ng Vietnam at ng China. Okay? Siguro, dapat nga po ngayon, papakita ko lahat ngayon yan, pero masyadong mahaba yung aking PowerPoint presentation. Siguro po sa susunod na Lunes, no? Dahil bukas we are in Parañaque for the Gamaleya vaccination. No? So, hindi po totoo na inignore ang ating presidente. I do have some data here. Babasahin ko po ang data. No? Siyempre, hindi ko naman memoryado, pero in response to the Philippine President's message to the Chinese ambassador, ito naman po ang nangyari. No? And sandali lang po. Ito po. Okay, ang nangyari po dito ay mula po nung nagsalita ang presidente, ito 220 po in May, in early March, yung mga barko, no? Now, dahil nga po dun sa pag-uusap ni Ambassador Wang at ni Presidente, ay bumaba po yung mga numero. From 220, 136 po umalis. At saka, yung second batch, another 65. So kung i-add nyo po yung 136 at saka 65, hina ko talaga sa math, no? Dapat talagang, so 109, mga 100, 200 na yan, no? Ilan ba yun? 136 to 6 plus 65. Can someone please add? 136 plus 65. That's actually 11, 4, 201 po ang umalis from the original 220. So wag po nating sabihin inignore ang ating presidente, no? Kasi mga 20 na lang po ang natitira dyan. No? And I think that's 201 fishing vessels po ang umalis. No? And all because of the message of the president and the warm relations that we enjoy with China. No? Siyempre po, inaasahan natin itong buwan na mas marami pang fishing vessels na aalis dyan. Sa natitirang kakaunti, we're still hoping na aalis po sila.
Okay. Yung second po niyang tanong ni Jenaline ay para po kay Ambassador Bagaching, pero nasagot na po niya ni Ambassador ito about dun sa assistance ng Philippines sa India at maging yung planong repatriation. Thank you, Secretary.
Okay, Joseph Morong, please.
Hi, sir. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Ambassador, Dr. Gloriani. I have a short question lang po for Dr. Nina. Dr. Nina?
Yes, Joseph.
Hi, sir. Ma'am, good afternoon na po. Ano po, how are you doing? Ma'am, yun pong sa Sputnik lang, yung pong recommendation, kanino po ito pwedeng gamitin? Is this beyond 59 or hanggang 59 lang po?
Beyond. 18 above. Wala siyang meron silang datos sa elderly.
So pwede po kahit mga hanggang sa senior na.
Yes.
Sige, ma'am, salamat po for your time. Secretary Roque, can I go to Yusek Vega, please? Dr. Vega, good afternoon, sir. Sir, my question is about your figures po. Yun pong nabanggit natin na mga figures ng increases sa ICU and isolation beds. These are NCR figures, sir, no? And by May 14 po kaya, sir, how many ICUs and isolation beds and ward beds would we have by May 14? Kasi you mentioned 367 yung additional ngayon and we need to update the DOH data drop, and then plus 110 sa private and 120 sa Tala. By May po, ilan po kaya tayo yung total natin?
Thank you, Joseph. But to put it in perspective, the HCUR, which is actually parang aggregate of the sum utilization of the intensive care units, isolation beds, and the mechanical ventilators, is now low. It's 57%. So medyo maganda na yung HCUR natin from the NCR. Ang nakikita namin ngayon, with an increase in the number of beds for the intensive care units, umabot na kami ng 1,148 or additional of 367 compared with last month of 781. Okay? Pero on ground, the total number of patients that we have for the intensive care unit right now is 850 pa rin. Kasi matagal ang transition time nun eh. Tapos may pumapasok pa before they can be discharged. So definitely we still have about mga 70-71% ang ating HCUR there doon sa kung disaggregated sa intensive care units. Yes, but generally, we're now hitting 57%, right? In terms of the number of, by May 14, in terms of the number of added intensive care units, we expect probably 50 plus or minus intensive care units to be added in our different facilities.
That is assuming, Doctor, that the rates of infection remain, no? Hindi siya tataas more than what we are having right now.
Yes, right. Ganito kasi yan. If at this present setup that we have, in terms of this pandemic, wherein you average 8,000 to 9,000, ang aming computation through FOSTER and reported by ATF is you need a minimum of at least 300 more ICU beds. And we were able to do that at 367. However, that's the minimum. To make sure that we have a buffer for this number of beds, you must hit 1,000, at least 1,000 beds for the buffer for this average number of new cases that we have. So, ang ginagawa po natin, because putting up an ICU, it's something, it's not an overnight thing. You need to prepare for it because these are specialized units needing technology, human resource, and definitely of a space that would have the necessary equipments and of course oxygen supply.
Yes, sir. Sir, yung pong computation nyo, 367 na dagdag natin, 110 private plus 120 from Tala, that will only give you 597 ICU so far. Yeah. So, tama po ba yun?
We're not saying, Joseph, the 367 is coming, 110 coming from the private. Wala akong sinabing figure. The total, I'm only saying the total number of ICUs that we were able to scale up and generate since last month is 367 to include mostly on the private, public sector and some private. But wala akong I don't have the figures kung ilan yung sa different. Basta total yan, 367.
Sir, by May 14, does that the current level that we have for ICU, because this is very critical for the patients, does that give you a confidence na we can relax to GCQ by May 14 if we have this amount of number of ICU beds? Does that give you parang kaya ba natin mag-GCQ given this number?
Ganito kasi yan, if there is an increase in the number of active cases, magla-lockstep yung increase in the number of patients needing isolation and intensive care unit. So the most important factor that we should be doing is suppression of the virus, meaning a very aggressive testing, contact tracing, isolation. Because if we can suppress the virus to even with a transmission rate of less than 1, then the number of ICUs that you would like to be having is there. Kasi hindi, kukonti na lang yung papasok eh. So with the lessening or the decreasing amount of cases that we have in the next several days, mas maganda yon because we are now better prepared compared with last month.
Okay, sir, thank you for your time. Secretary Roque, same question. With the current level of ICU, does that give you or the IATF the level of confidence to think of GCQ? Because you've always said that we have to balance, economy and then health.
Well, there is a reason po why we are in fact taking concrete steps to improve our healthcare capacity. Kasi itong healthcare capacity po is one important indicator for either the lowering or the hiring of community quarantine. So kung wala ka sa critical at kung wala ka man lang sa moderate, and right now, kung tama yung computation namin at 50%, ni wala ka sa moderate healthcare capacity utilization, then that's one factor in considering a decrease in the community classification. Now, ang babantayan natin yung 2-week attack rate, daily attack rate, at yung R0. And so far now, ang R0 natin is doing good. The world standard is 1, and I think we have achieved that. So if we are able to maintain our R0, if we are able to maintain yung attack rate na hindi classified as critical, and we are able to improve our healthcare capacity, then there is a distinct possibility pursuant to the formula adopted by the IATF that we would have a different quarantine classification, but of course the IATF is a collegial body. It will have to be made by the IATF as a body.
Different classification, you mean GCQ, sir?
Well, there's basta po ma-maintain natin yung ating R0 at mapababa pa rin natin yung ating mga attack rate at magpatuloy po itong additional healthcare capacity natin, yan po naman, sang-ayon sa formula, may warrant GCQ, but that's a decision to be made by the IATF as a collegial body.
Sir, sa budget lang, si Yusek Juven ng DOF, nasa laging handa siya. And then he mentioned that $18.4 billion yung utang natin, and out of that number is $1.2 billion dollars allotted for vaccines. Now, he said that the interest rate is 0.6 to 0.8% per annum. So would you be able to compute, sir? And can you give us the terms of payment? Ilang years po babayaran itong 8.4? And by the end of that term, how much would we have owed this multilateral sources and bilateral sources that he announced?
Joseph, how I wish you asked that from the USEC in Laging Handa, but I'm not prepared to answer that now. Alam mo naman, mahina talaga sa math, okay? Maraming salamat, Joseph.
So yung Bayanihan 3 ba priority?
Wala pa pong na-i-issue na certification. Maraming salamat, Joseph. USEC Roque, please.
Yes, Secretary. Tanong ni Raquel Bayan ng PBS, paano daw po ang procedure kapag mag-lockdown ng isang government agency dahil sa COVID-19? Kanino i-address ang letter for clearance since sa GSIS at QC ay may nasawi na due to COVID-19?
Ang alam ko po, wala naman talagang complete lockdown. Meron pong skeletal forces sa mga tanggapan ng gobyerno.
Opo. From Maricel Halili of TV5, Israeli ambassador said they cannot donate excess vaccines to the Philippines because of contracts with pharmaceutical companies. What are the other options of government?
Ask and answered na po kanina.
From Eileen Taliping of Abante Tonight, hinarang umano ng Nayong Filipino Foundation Board ang plano na magtayo ng temporary vaccination center sa nakatenggang property nila sa Entertainment City kahit may endorsement na ang NTF at ni Department of Health Secretary Roque para sa planong walk-in at drive-thru vaccination facility sa sandaling ilarga na ang maramihang pagbabakuna laban sa COVID-19. Ang mga kumokontra daw po ay appointees umano ng Malacanang sa board. Ano daw po ang masasabi ng palasyo?
Pagbibigay, alam ko na po ito kay ES as our primus inter pares, and he would still have jurisdiction over trustees of government-owned and controlled corporations.
Okay, thank you, Secretary.
Maraming salamat po. At dahil wala na po tayong mga katanungan, unang-una maraming salamat to Philippine Ambassador to India, Ramon Bagatsing. Sir, maraming salamat po. Ang dami naming nakalap na impormasyon sa inyo. Maraming salamat kay Yusek Leopoldo Vega. As usual, Yusek Vega, wag po sana kayo magsawa na maging guest sa aming press briefing. At kay Dr. Nina Guleriani, thank you very much, ma'am, of the DOST Vaccine Expert Panel Head. Maraming salamat, Yusek Roque. Maraming salamat sa ating mga kasama sa Malacanang Press Corps. At syempre po, maraming salamat sa inyong lahat sa inyong patuloy na pagtangkilik sa ating press briefing. Sa ngalan po na ating Presidente, Rodrigo Roa Duterte, ito po inyong spokesharing nagsasabi, kaya po natin to at malapit na po ang Merry Christmas. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Matinding kalaban ng COVID.
Ayokong makahawa.
At mahawa.
Pero kailangan ko na magtrabaho.
Kaya di ako magiging pabaya.
Di matigas ang aking ulo.
Iingatan ko ang aking sarili.
Para maingatan ang pamilya ko.
Ito ang ambag ko.
Ako.
Ikaw.
Lahat tayo.
Sama-sama nating
Mayaangat ang bayan.
Basta't sama-sama tayo.
Sa pag-ingat buhay.
Para sa ating hanap buhay.
Mask, hugas, iwas.